Our next conversation will be with two Chancellor's Fellows from the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, who will discuss wildlife preservation and restoration in terms of our current global climate. Allow me to introduce Dr. Ann Todgham, Professor and Chair of the Department of Animal Science, and Dr. Nann Fangue, Professor and Chair of the Department of Wildlife, Fish, and Conservation Biology.
It's a real pleasure to be with everyone today and to share some of our work on California's emblematic fishes, innovative approaches, and traditional ecological knowledge for salmon or NER conservation. So California is home to many iconic fishes. We have the threatened green sturgeon, the highly endangered delta smelt, found only in the San Francisco Bay Delta and nowhere else on Earth. But probably the most economically important, culturally significant, and iconic group of fishes in the Northern Hemisphere are the salmon, trout, and their relatives. So like this Chinook salmon, salmonids are adapted for life in dynamic environments. Most are highly mobile. They move between the ocean and the rivers to complete their life cycle. They're extraordinarily adapted to local conditions, from deserts to rainforests in the Pacific Northwest, and to high mountain streams that once dominated California's Central Valley. This unique ecology has resulted in a handful of species producing hundreds of genetically distinct runs with life histories that are, of course, superbly tuned to their habitats. So the way that we classify these unique runs for conservation purposes, we call them ESUs, or ecologically significant units, as defined by the Federal Endangered Species Act. We recognize 32 distinct salmonids in California, and most are in serious decline, and one has already gone extinct. By 2070, we anticipate that 7 will remain, and by 2120, 8 will remain. And importantly, none will be Central Valley Chinook salmon. The reasons for these declines are, of course, numerous, but in the broadest sense, this has to do with how water for agriculture and municipal uses are managed in our state. So the picture to the left shows a typical year from the mid-1800s. The Central Valley was a vast network of rivers, channels, and sloughs, and during the winter and the spring, the valley was wet, and the floodplains were the dominant habitat type used by juvenile salmonids. The snowpack in the Sierras fed cold water to the high elevation streams and down into the valley, creating critical habitat for salmonids spawning and rearing. The image to the right is more typical of today, less snowpack, but also a notably drier valley, resulting from extensive damming and diversion of water upstream. On top of these changes, we're all too familiar with drought conditions. This is a picture of Lake Shasta from just a few years ago. Here's an image of the extensive rivers and streams in California's Central Valley, Sacramento in the center, Redding to the north, Lake Shasta and the McCloud River to the north as well. Now in black, you can see the impact of the installation of all the rim dams, blocking critical habitat for salmon migration and spawning. The inability to reproduce in these critical spawning habitats, of course, puts populations on a road towards extinction. But despite these extensive changes to our environment and the grim future I've painted so far for salmonids, there are many examples of creative solutions to save these species. And so what Ann's going to talk about for the second part of the talk is work that we've been doing in partnership with the Winnemem Wintu tribe of the McCloud River up near Redding to conserve the Chinook salmon, or the NER.
Okay. So have you ever been inspired by someone who fundamentally changes the way that you look at something or you think about something? And as academics, we're constantly thinking about what we know, what we don't know, and we're always being challenged to think about things in new ways to make sure that we come up with the best questions and the best solutions. But I would say that it's very rare for us to have the privilege of having someone who changes how we holistically think about something, and in our case, the conservation of salmon. So I'd like to introduce you to Chief Sisk. Chief Sisk is the spiritual leader and chief of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, and she's been fighting for salmon for decades. In particular, trying to bring salmon back to the McCloud River just north of Redding, California. And so in the mid-40s, when the Shasta Dam was finalized, Lake Shasta was formed. And it in fact flooded all the ancestral lands of the Winnemem-Wintu, and they were forcibly removed from their lands. For the salmon, what it meant was that the natural migration from the Pacific Ocean up the Sacramento River and into the high mountain waters of the McCloud River were halted, were blocked. So this is the McCloud River, or Winnemem-Waiwaket in Winnemem. And this is probably one of the most pristine rivers that you will see in California. And it is where it's a very important ancestral site for the Winnemem-Wintu, and I want to tell you a little bit about this river. So to be able to understand why the Winnemem-Wintu have been fighting tirelessly to bring the salmon back, I think you have to understand or hear a little bit about their creation story. So the Winnemem believe, I should start by saying, sorry, I missed to say that the Mount Shasta, the melt from Mount Shasta is what feeds the McCloud River. And their creation story, Mount Shasta, or Biliampuyuk in Winnemem, is where all life originated. And the creator sent different life forms down the river through time. Humans were the last to be assigned. And the salmon came back and helped the humans on their journey. And in fact, the salmon gave them their voice. So the Winnemem-Wintu feel that they are the guardians and the voice of the salmon, and they are there to fight for their return. So about a year ago, Chief Sisk contacted Nann and I to help with bringing salmon back to the McCloud River. They had recently signed co-management and co-stewardship agreements with Cal Fish and Wildlife and NOAA to bring salmon back. But she didn't want to use traditional hatchery practices to reintroduce salmon into the McCloud River. She felt that it was really important that the wildness of the salmon was preserved, that the salmon could be salmon. And using her traditional ecological knowledge, knew that if we could rear them in a more natural system, they would be a better salmon going back into the river system. And so this led to her envisioning what we now call the NER nature-based system. And her drawing is on the left there. On the right is what we built in partnership with her here at UC Davis, taking advantage of the expertise that Nann's group, particularly Dennis Cockrell, had in building fish rearing systems. Now, what makes this system really unique is it's fed by the water from the river, and what happens is it comes, those boxes that are on the side is where the salmon are reared, the salmon eggs are reared, and the water comes up from the bottom through the gravel, which is very natural the way that it would be in the river system. When the salmon hatch, they then have the ability to swim around those small boxes and then choose when they want to enter that bigger round tank in the middle, which has lots of bare grasses and other natural rocks and stream things. And then you can see at the very end there's that chute, which then also the salmon can then choose when they want to enter the river system. So this system is really unique in that it allows salmon to choose when they want to enter the river system. It provides them, importantly for the Winnemem-Wintu, all the medicines that come from the river water and that come from the natural vegetation that lines the river and that comes from the rocks. What we've noticed as physiologists is that they develop their natural instincts and behavior to predators immediately. They're a much stronger swimmer. And so, this system really does allow for the production of early life stages of salmon that allow them to enter the stream where we hope that they will repopulate a river system in a really strong form. This shows you the system more in action, right? So now we have this cover on it so that it actually is shaded from the sun. It gets quite hot up there. It's got bear fencing around it to keep the bears out. And I'd like to just contrast it with this. So these are heath trays, and this is what Cal Fish and Wildlife is using right beside us to raise their salmon as well. This has been a hatchery practice for decades and works really well in a hatchery system, but I hope you can see that it's extremely unnatural. In this instance, salmon hatch. When we have enough that have hatched, they all just get dumped into the river system and then swept down the river. Right? So it's a very different system. So this is Adina, which is this is where the Nur nature system is situated along with that hatchery system. And I show this because what I think is really important to know is that if we want to decolonize Western science, we need to understand the cultural importance of ceremony in traditional ecological knowledge. There's lots of things that are different scientifically about approaches of Western science and traditional ecological knowledge, but one of the fundamental differences is there is no spiritual piece in Western science, and there is a very strong spiritual piece in traditional ecological knowledge. And so in the middle, you might be able to see a little circle, and those are the ceremonial grounds of the Winnemem Wintu. And every time there's a salmon release, there's a ceremony where prayers are laid down so that the salmon are sent off with those prayers and they know how to return. I want to have this picture to highlight that it's not just the adults of the tribe that are involved. The children play a very important role. The children have the purest hearts, and so they are the ones that actually let the salmon go into the Nur nature-based system because they are going to set them off in the best way. So this is, again, from a different angle. You can see our systems that are set up. But one thing that Chief Sisk is very adamant about is that just saving one population of salmon isn't going to make the river healthy. It's not going to make the ecosystem healthy, and it's not going to make her people healthy. We need to bring as many salmon that used to be there back. And that leads us to New Zealand. There is an important population of salmon, Chinook salmon, or Nur, in New Zealand. These are salmon that came from the McLeod River. In the 1900s, in the early 1900s, Livingstone Stone took salmon from the McLeod River to the South Island of New Zealand and put them into the river system there for recreational fishing. So what's interesting is that about 20 years ago, these things take time, Chief Sisk was doing a war dance. Chief Sisk and the tribe were doing a war dance on Shasta Dam to protest the dam. And it got broadcast. It was a multi-day event, got broadcast around the world. And thousands of miles away, a Maori chief saw, this always gets me a little emotional, saw this footage and called Chief Sisk and said, "We've been taking care of your salmon, and I'd like to help you bring them home." So it's taken about 20 years, but I think we're almost there. In collaboration with a number of New Zealand and California state agencies, water districts, engineers, NGOs, and academics, we are very close to being able to bring New Zealand salmon home. What I'm showing you here are some of our New Zealand colleagues, including, I didn't mention, there's a lot of Maori tribe importance in this as well. This is Deep Stream, which is a high mountain stream on the South Island, and we hope to bring our first salmon back from this place. So as I wrap up, I just wanted to articulate that Nann and I chose to present this because funds from our Chancellor's Fellowships helped to fund this research. And having access to unrestricted funds as a faculty member is a real privilege. It allows us to do science we're passionate about. It allows us to do science that's not yet funded but needs a little something to get it going. And I think importantly, it allows us to meet the mission of UC Davis, which is to do solution-based science that's important to all of Californians, particularly the underserved communities. And we use this slide at the end because I wanted to show you too that it's a really important training ground for the next generation of scientists in fish conservation. And so there are images of both Nann's lab, which is the giant one on the top, my slightly smaller lab at our holiday party in the horse barn, but also the cultural resource specialists from the tribe who are taking care of the salmon. And I can't imagine a more innovative project in salmon conservation that incorporates indigenous traditional ecological knowledge for this type of work that we're doing. And I'll just end by saying that Governor Newsom just released his strategy for salmon conservation, and the work that is being done with the Winnemem-Wintu was the feature of that conservation strategy. So it's making a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nann and Ann. We have time for a few questions.
Thank you so much. That was really incredible, and I agree. I'm emotional too, so thank you. I have a question about I know this is brand new, but are you comparing the survivability of both the conventional method that you showed, as well as the NER nature-based method, and kind of when do you expect to see some results from the survivability of those two different methods?
Yeah, so that was the work that we showed you was the first year of trying this sort of experimental methodology, and we plan to do this year over year, and a goal is to make exactly the comparison that you mentioned. So one of the things we learned in the first year is just how much sort of pre-deployment training and exchange needs to happen to plan some of these things, because there are a lot of interesting contrasts between how Western scientists make measurements or count things in relation to how it might be done in a traditional way. So we're trying to work through what our combined methodology might be. But the hope is to be able to do that and ideally demonstrate that this method, we can see it, you can see it in the fish, you can see a notable difference. The most striking one is anti-predator behavior. If you put a shadow over the tank, those fish hide immediately, and the heath tray fish have no response. So there are some things that are almost, you don't even need data really to sort of to see it. But these fish, when they go into the river, we actually have to then collect them in a trap because they have to get over that dam. So there's an opportunity there also to count the number of individuals that originate from the different systems. So we're working on it, absolutely. Thank you.
Other questions?
Are you aware of differences that would have evolved already from the New Zealand population? I mean, what are the expectations that would have different behavioral selections? And I mean, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and so there is a lot of genetic work that's going on to try to figure out, compare what we currently have in California versus what's in New Zealand. There's a tricky piece to that, though, is that, so in New Zealand, they're still very wild, whereas we manage pretty much all of our Chinook here in California. So they're all, they're for the most part, hatchery raised, and so their genetics have actually really been winnowed. So it's really hard to know whether or not New Zealand salmon are new, their genetics are new, or do they better represent what we used to have in our salmon and what's been lost. But one of the reasons we're doing it is we also want to be able to bring back as many of the different runs. So Nann mentioned that Chinook salmon have these 4 different runs. We're trying to bring back as many as we can from the New Zealand population. But we think by choosing salmon that live in these high altitude river systems in New Zealand, we are giving them the best chance of being able to come back to a system that is at a high altitude as well. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much for really giving us this connection, not only here in California, but with the world. And I was wondering, are there other parts around the world that might have a similar conditions or similar salmons, or as you're looking into the future, are there other sites that we should think about?
Yeah, so, in the salmonids broadly, like rainbow trout, they're one of the most heavily introduced fish in the world. So we're physiologists fundamentally, and so, from a evolutionary sort of perspective, all these populations have been tucked away across the globe, and they might become very important as climate change and anthropogenic change persist. And so I'm not aware of any other Chinook salmon populations that have been sort of established in a way that is as unique as what you saw today, but certainly when you're thinking about the diversity of salmonids, there may be some important populations in places that we may rely on in the future or don't yet know about.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing. Bringing salmon back from New Zealand is no small feat. The regulations in this state have never thought about this being an option. So I think this will be a really good way for us to figure out a way to do it, and then we can look more broadly and see if we can do it more than once.
So I'm not all that familiar with the geography up there, but I'm presuming that the McClure River flows into Shasta Dam, and there's no way to get the fish up except by capturing them down below and hauling them up. So is there any potential for creating a ladder there? Okay. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the chief has a big vision for restoring the system, which includes getting rid of invasive plants, restoring the riparian habitat, but also a big component is volitional passage. So a way to reroute the fish around the dam and allow them to move freely back and forth in a volitional way. And so this project is big in terms of it involves buying pieces of land along the river to do some of these big projects, and of course fish ladders or volitional passage structures or any of those engineering type large scale projects are very expensive and will take some time, but her vision is much bigger just than what we showed you today. She wants the whole river and she wants the fish to be wild. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.